Oh, and we're live.
Bro.
Bro.
How's it going? Hold on.
Good.
Let me switch this up. Yeah.
It's Christmas.
So, it's Christmas. Christ my
Yes.
Um, okay, so, I think intellectual dark web thing is interested in trying to find out whether the members that make up the web are themselves actually becoming the very thing that they were trying to fighting, or that they were trying to fight. Sorry,
hmm
is that something that's true? Is that not true? I think we should find out.
Interesting. Well, I unfortunately don't follow intellectual dark web much, but one thing I can say for sure is people are tribal and they tend to group around ideas, and often those ideas are associated with certain people. They get latched on to certain people, and it makes those people's lives very difficult in the sense that if they change their minds, then they lose a lot of their supporters and all that cult of personality shit. So, yes, is that the question? Is it like it's kind of in our name to Church of Logic, right? Is is it is it a cult of logic? Is Are they putting too much emphasis? Are they giving too much credit to certain ideas or people? It's very possible. Happens all the time. And I'm not saying that the whole intellectual dark web sees things the same way. I think that for now they're doing okay because there's a lot of different types of ideas out there, right?
Yeah, and I think it would be important though to distinguish between certain kinds of people, because you have people like Jordan Peterson, who is in a field of science that is highly debatable. I mean, the psyche is incredibly complex. You can draw different kinds of patterns, or extrapolate patterns from the psyche in ways that are very creative. You can basically imbue your own biases when it comes to that kind of science. So, even theoretical physics, just in the word theoretical,
Yeah.
you're forced to sort of apply your own mind's kind of worldview onto, you're basically projecting your ideas onto the the universe, right? To try to find out, well, maybe this is the way things work. But ultimately speaking, I think it's important to make a differentiation between those kinds of fields of sciences, and then the fields of sciences and also the careers that don't really have anything to do with bias. So, for example, evolutionary biologists tend to have less of that cult following, and I think it's because they deal in hard facts and they can extrapolate information from it, sure, and have their own biases, but you tend to see things very clearly. You tend to be able to know when Richard Dawkins sort of is just implementing his own ideas versus the ideas that he presents as just what we seem to be, not even seem, but what we have found, what actually is. So objective truths in terms of practicality, and then there are objective truths in terms of what we're trying to establish. And I think there's a very clear distinction between both. So which kind of people in the intellectual dark web are really falling prey to the ideas and the ideologies being created as something that is part of bias or something that just is. So I think they all share one ideology, which I think is objective on a level that's not biased, and that would be the free flow of information. Because obviously, if you're constraining ideas, then there's no way to be objective to begin with. So that's the one thing that I think they all share. But then, I think Jordan Peterson would be the greatest example as to bias being something that creates an impossibility for that person to not start being rigid in their ideas, right? And I think you had explained that in an interesting way when we spoke earlier, right? Because you said it has something to do with supporters, right?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think this happens with everyone. It just, I was using an example as Jordan Peterson. He was accused of this by a lot of people. I don't personally know or necessarily agree or disagree, but it was simply that at some point, I think someone asked him if he believed that Jesus Christ had lived and died on the cross and then been resurrected, like if he felt that was actually the truth. And Peterson gave a pretty vague response, and he was kind of like, well, it depends what you mean by Jesus, or something like that. And what he was being accused of is that, well, like over 60% of his Patreon followers are Christian. So it gets difficult if someone is at the head of a thought movement of some kind, and then all of their support is backing them based off of the ideas that they started off with or presenting on a large scale. How are they supposed to change their minds or criticize certain things? I mean, some of them do, but it gets really hard. And I think I've seen this in a lot of public debates. People who are generally fairly intelligent, debating two different topics, two different perspectives, and one of them gets a bit of an upper hand on the other one, and things start just getting reactive. And they pull out the big guns, they start accusing each other and name calling, and it breaks down very quickly. I mean,
Yeah. But you see, this is what I think is unprecedented about the intellectual dark web, is that that doesn't seem to be happening. I mean, you have Jordan Peterson going head to head with Sam Harris, and they're trying to come to some kind of agreement or common ground. Right?
Yeah, they stay pretty level-headed throughout.
Yeah, they're trying to find common ground, and they're doing that through the I guess the ideology that, and I don't even want to call it an ideology, but through the only means that they can do it, which is to stay open to ideas. You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, they're getting better at it.
Unprecedented. So, Sam Harris, I think, has to be biased in some way, and Jordan Peterson as well. I think everybody brings their own bias to the table, and then that creates a sort of following. But then there are people, like I said, evolutionary biologists who can just sort of present things as they are, or historians who can say, well, look, here's very clearly what happened. Here's the proof that we have.
Well, there are things that are clear, and there are a lot of things that aren't.
That aren't, exactly.
Yeah,
and then, but that's what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that it's very clear that when people who have careers like that, or who are in those fields, it's very easy to distinguish between what they present as being facts, backed up by data and scientific methods and that kind of stuff, and then how between that and what they're saying about that, right? Like Yuval Harari is really does that very well. He very clearly states this is what happened. For example, in the 20th century, we have proof through documents, through video, and through testimony that, for example, Stalin killed many millions of people. So, these are facts that he can very straightforward say. But then he'll apply some kind of idea behind it, and that's something that he'll point out as being his idea. So with historians, with skeptics like Matt Dillahunty, with biologists, these people are at less risk for that kind of cult-minded sort of ideology solidifying in their own minds. I think because of the nature of what they're doing. Is that something you would say is fair?
Well, when you're talking about those topics, but the issue here is that they're talking about different topics. And so, yeah, you can have a litany of facts that everyone agrees on, and those do exist. I feel like we need a book of facts that every human agrees on, something like that. But when we're talking about
that's hard to do. I mean,
well, yeah.
Think about the flat earthers, right?
Yeah, but I mean, there are some things, and that's what I'd like to see. I'd like to see a map of things that everyone agrees on, and then what trickles down, right? What most people agree with, and to what degree, and who are the people who disagree, and what are their arguments. Anyways, what I'm saying here is that what Jordan Peterson and Sam Harris are talking about are not facts. They're talking about things like morality and things that aren't so clear. They're like, yes, we have these facts. What do we do with them? What is right to do with them?
Yeah.
What is best to do with them? And that's a different topic. That's a that's a much more difficult topic, I'd say.
Yeah, but I think it was clear to make this differentiation between those people and then the people who seem to be mediating the debates between guys in the intellectual dark web who do have something to say about morality and other things that have to do with abstract concepts like truth and so on. Um, I, I wonder if the intellectual dark web is inherently doomed from the beginning because, you know, if you think about it as a web, which is, I mean, okay, so the guy who coined the term is Eric Weinstein, and he's, I mean, brilliant. And the term is, it's a self-defeating title because he knew that if he didn't design a self-defeating title, that it would take on the attributes of a cult. But, you know, just the fact that it's a web, I think he might not have taken into account the very visual and immature nature of human beings. And by that I mean that if you visualize this movement as being a web, then you organize yourself around a core, around the center of the web, which would be, I guess, Sam Harris and Jordan Peterson, if you really want to get down to it. And then if you go a little bit outside of that web, you know, you have other guys like, you know, the Weinstein brothers, and then you go a little bit further out, then you have Stéphane Molineux and Lauren Southern and Ben Shapiro, and then, you know, you keep going further out and further out, and it seems to be people who have more solidified ideologies rather than, you know, that they're trying to bring to the table and sort of force their way into the center of the web. So I think the nature of just the idea that it's a web ultimately makes it collapse. Because, you know, it just ends up being anybody and everybody who has something to say in conjunction with the web. It's kind of like, well, okay, I'm part of the intellectual dark web, and here are my ideas. And so maybe by virtue of it being a web, it allows everybody to have their say, and that's the point. So that's a good thing. You know, in that sense, the visual aid of a web is good because you can say, well, everybody has a point of view, and everybody should be able to say their point of view, no matter how preposterous or even offensive. But then ultimately speaking, the movement is only good to do that. But then when it comes to actually establishing any sort of progress, it ultimately just solidifies into whoever supports one side or the other at the center of the web. So if Jordan Peterson gets a bigger following than Sam Harris, then it'll end up being that, you know, and if Sam Harris's following ends up, you know, being more numerous, then it might end up being that. But it seems to be just a struggle between two ideologies, ultimately speaking.
Well, I mean, as it is, yeah, right now. But, I mean, what if someone comes up with a third view, a third option? I mean, you'd have to take a
or one
different...
that, yeah, or I think what you and I are trying to do is find something that can reconcile both their points of views. Mm-hmm. Right? Like I don't see it, and I think that's what they're trying to do as well. I don't necessarily see Sam Harris and Peterson just saying, okay, I want to establish my cult following. I think they're both coming together and saying, how can we compromise? How can we reconcile both our points of views? But I don't think, you know, at the end of the day, they're going to find the crux of their differences, and then they're going to have to work up from there and say, well, here's where I don't or can't compromise. But at least they've compromised enough whereas, you know, you can see both their ideology systems able to coexist, you know. But ultimately speaking, the people who have been mediating and sort of establishing a larger perspective on what the intellectual dark web is and as a movement and what it's meant to be doing, aside from just restoring freedom of speech and freedom of ideas, I think it's not really a movement that's going to be decisive in how the next century is going to turn out when it comes to choosing an ideology to live by. And Yuval Harari, again, I keep falling back to him. He just very clearly states that very well in his books. He says, well, it seems to be an issue with technology. It seems to be something that is getting out of our hands, and it's like the power dynamic. It's like, well, do we use liberalism as a religion? Well, we have in the last 20th century. Liberalism won out over communism and fascism. But in the future, liberalism is undermined because of technology, because the human is no longer the authority here. We're creating algorithms and computers that have more authority. Therefore, how do we live our lives? Through what ideology? Do we go back to the old religions, which is what Peterson is advocating? We should follow the strict, rigid structures of morality that has been laid down over time, whether that's something that has been handed down from an actual anthropomorphic God, or if it's just been created by us over time and it's become a reality that God lives through us. I don't know, right?
I don't think he's just saying that. I think he's saying that we can't throw it out.
No, yeah.
Yeah, he's not saying that we have to go back to exactly the way things were done, but just
no, but I think he's saying continue. I think that's where it's not clear. I think he's saying, well, I continue acting as if God exists. I act as if it were all true, without sort of like making clear what he does believe in terms of, the other details that people really want to know. It's kind of like, oh, I want to get the dirt. Does he actually think that Jonas lived in a whale for 3 days? It's like, I don't think he does, but he doesn't want to state that he doesn't, because then he starts unraveling this thing that he's trying to keep together. He's trying to get people to follow the very, I guess, the very patterns that we've been following throughout, our religious lives in the last 12,000 years of civilization. And in order to preserve that, you can't start debating whether these parables and these stories were actual truths or not. Do you know what I mean? That's why I think he stays away from them.
Yeah, well, I mean, he talks a lot about the principles found in them, right? And I mean, I do think he does talk about, I don't even listen to him that much, or ever really anymore, but I mean, he talks about a lot of biblical stuff being almost Jungian, right? Archetypal, metaphoric. What I think he's talking about is that it's almost like the Bible was a Jungian wellspring, like how the unconscious, the what's the term? I guess the superconscious or something.
The collective unconscious.
Yeah, that's right. The collective unconscious kind of burst forth, and the Bible kind of came out of it. I think that's sort of how he sees it. So there might have been some events that reflected some of the symbolism in the time, and from what he says, it sounds like maybe the crest of that was Christ, and a few other events.
He doesn't take into it.
But then a lot of it,
I'm just saying,
it's like
sorry.
Imagine no worries, I'm almost done. But imagine like most of the Bible is dreamland, but the dreams become so relevant and so powerful to universal concepts that they kind of break through into reality sometimes. And
yeah, I like that. It's a very interesting way to put it. But you see, here's the thing. It breaks through the reality that we've experienced, since the beginning of time, I guess, as human beings. But it's no longer something that can break through the reality that's coming forward, into the future. If the human being is no longer a human being, or at least is drastically changing to the point where we have to redefine what it is to be a human being, then you also have to redefine how a human being must live, morally speaking. So to give a very potent example, it's kind of like if you were to create a robot and it's artificially intelligent, it has its own consciousness in a sense, but it's vastly more intelligent than you are. And I think obviously intelligence and consciousness is something that's going to decouple in the future. Whether you want to debate, what consciousness is or not, if something at least seems conscious on the level that we are, it's safe to say that it's decoupled from intelligence. Because you don't need to have a brain in order to how can I explain? You don't need to have a human brain in order to be intelligent. I mean, computers already proved that today. So when it comes to the morality, if you have a computer that's incredibly intelligent and conscious on whichever side of the gate that you want to step on, conscious in a way that's just mimicking our consciousness or conscious in its own right, it seems to be that regardless of that binary scenario, morality is not relevant. We have the capacity, however, to understand, moral dilemmas. That doesn't make us any better at being moral at the end of the day. So, like, monkeys and, let's say, dogs don't understand that it's immoral to, eat a baby, for example. But
they do it all the time.
They do it all the time, exactly. Whereas we do have the sort of dilemma of, this causes pain and so on. We have the dilemma that is very acutely aware at the forefront of our consciousness. We have all these moral dilemmas, so we have the ability to understand them, but we don't necessarily have the ability to know what to do about that. You know what I mean? So it's the same for future entities. Therefore, if those future entities live alongside us, if we become those entities, or if we live in a sort of like in-between stage, it's very clear that reality that you said, that, religion and the way that Jordan Peterson has been talking about religion,
dreamscape,
it's very clear that,
realities.
those realities will no longer be useful. And that's what Sam Harris's argument is. And I tend to side with Sam Harris in that regard. Because, it's like, well,
they won't be useful.
Well, I mean, they're going to be useful, but they're not useful in the capacity that he employs it. I think Jordan Peterson says, we need to continue going to church. We need to, continue valuing these religious traditions and rituals and heed their warnings and all this kind of stuff. And yes, that's very useful. You can to some degree do that, but none of that is really going to help you when you've got algorithms running the world and making all the decisions. Because then the torch of action on morality, is handed off to something else. So what's left for human beings,
We have no idea if machines will ever be able to make moral decisions for us.
No, but we don't know, but yet we're doing it. We're already giving algorithms the ability to choose our partners, to choose our employees, to choose even our organs. You have algorithms that choose.
I don't think that there's any group or company that is just like, okay, I'll just do whatever the machine tells me. No, they use the machine to help them, and then they make the final decision based off of their own sense.
But it's clear that at some point they won't trust their own sense. They're going to see that algorithms make a lot better decisions than we do.
Well, we don't know that yet.
Because we're biased.
That's what I'm saying. We don't know if they do yet. They might help, but we have no idea if they ultimately will.
Okay. So look at it this way. Look at the stock market.
Yeah.
Nobody computes all that data. It's impossible for anybody to compute all the data.
You're talking about things on that scale. But you're not talking about things on a personal level, when you're interacting with other human beings and when morality is actually an issue.
Yeah, no, I mean, like I said, I don't think morality is something that pertains to. I don't think there's a correlation between intelligence and morality, right? So we've already agreed there.
Like I like to say, evil is intelligence without heart.
Exactly. But here's the thing that's clear, is that efficiency and pleasure and happiness and things like that, they don't necessarily rely on morality. Mm-hmm. Right? You don't attain those things through morality. No, you attain those things through intelligence. And that's why algorithms know better than you, who you're going to find attractive in your area. So it can show you the faces based on your previous sort of decisions and all this kind of stuff. you know, who you find more attractive. And then also based on your Facebook profile and everything that you've written online, all these other things, if these algorithms come together, they say, okay, well, here's who you're going to be happier with. You know, this person's not the person you find the most attractive, but they're the most compatible, and you would never know it, right? But you trust it because it can compute a lot more data. So, you know, Yuval, again, it states that very clearly, is that, you know, we seem to be algorithms ourselves. We work in algorithmic ways.
I agree to an extent, but let's just say that I do think that the algorithm, again, it's an incredible tool, but it can't be a master. Once, like I heard someone say, it was Jason Silva. He's like a popular YouTuber. He talks about big ideas and he has beautifully edited videos. But he was talking about how technology is an extension of the mind. But I mean, it's been said forever that the mind is a beautiful servant, but a dangerous master. It's the same thing with technology. Imagine this incredible machine. It's reviewed millions and millions of relationships. It knows how to compute all of it, knows you personally too, and all your relationships, and it puts you with someone, yet you're still miserable. It probably won't happen. You'd probably be very happy, chances are, but what if you're still miserable? What, are you still going to listen to the machine?
No, I mean, I think, you know, you're right. That's a very good spoke in the wheel here. But look, I'm not making a case for algorithms knowing to make better decisions. I think it's innate in the nature of human beings to want what we can't have. So yes, ultimately speaking, algorithms don't know, you know, they don't know what's best, ultimately speaking, but they know better, and that's all that we need. And that's how Yuval puts it. He says it's enough that technology can do better, and that's it. And we hand over all the power because ultimately speaking, we are in a sort of world of proliferation. Well, it's a world of race. It's like, well, how can I get an advantage as an individual?
Sooner or later,
so I'm going to choose.
Someone owns the machine. Someone owns the technology. The technology has to be centralized somewhere until way in the future. Someone is closer to the switch. Someone is always going to have the power, no matter what, until we literally give the machines the power to control us. And I don't think they can make then they have no direction. If it's not for our happiness, then what, like, how would they make
that's the thing.
how would it make its own decisions ultimately?
Yeah, well, again, it depends on your view. It's if you understand that humans are algorithms, biological systems are algorithms, then algorithms that are created in a system that's non-biological, like in a computer, if those algorithms can compute and understand and manage biological algorithms, you know, it just seems very difficult to.
I know a guy who does computational biology. They build simulations, and they have no fucking clue what's going on. It's way more complicated than that. And they're trying, and they're not really getting very far. And also, I mean, once again, I'm going to talk about Jim Al-Khalili. He talks about how it's turning out that it seems that like a large part of biological processes are quantum, and that's not algorithm based.
No,
not mechanical.
But like I said, it's just enough that these things are better. Now, I'm not making a case for them and saying that they are better, but if they appear better, if they seem to do better, then we're going to hand over all the power. But I think we're digressing a little bit.
One thing I'll say is if this technology really is blockchain, open source, and it really does like center in on what is absolutely best, you know what it's going to do? It's going to turn itself into a means to make ourselves better. And we'll need it less and less the more it works on that. You see what I'm saying?
It could go that way. But then, like I said, if ultimately speaking, you remain with the power of making decisions of saying, I'm using this algorithm or I'm not, then, you know, I think at some point
it will train us little by little in a very soft way, or whatever way it finds is best through algorithms, to make humans into beings who are better at making decisions until we're
Yeah,
all
yeah.
way
I mean,
better than a machine can be. Well, I don't know if that's possible, but until
yeah,
the
but that
point
it's a
where we're so good where we need a lot less.
yeah, but it's a very blurry line because it's like, and again, I think you just have to read Homo Deus because he explains this all very clearly. He says that once the algorithm starts making decisions for you, you can learn off of the algorithm and saying, okay, well, these are the decisions it's making for me, and they seem to be working. So I'm going to start making those kinds of decisions. But then, how do you know that those algorithms haven't pushed you and changed you? Do you know what I mean? At what point does the algorithm help you, and at what point does it shape you? So if it starts shaping you, it's not actually helping you. Then, ultimately speaking, when you stop using it, and once you think that you've learned from it, you've actually just learned that you're a lot more different, and that you don't know who you are anymore because you've given yourself up to any extent to the algorithm. So I think it's a scenario where we have to either stop right now before we do get addicted to algorithms, or we completely give way to them. So ultimately speaking, I would say, yeah, I think we should probably not, right? We should either preserve humanity as the black box that it has been so far, something that hasn't been cracked, um, as much as possible. And I think again, Yuval says that. I think he's for that idea. He says, well, we're going to need to know who we are a lot more in the future because already Google knows us a lot better than we do in certain ways, and in ways that are a lot
In
more
certain
dangerous to us
ways,
than we
but
know.
I mean, yeah.
But I think this is all relevant to the intellectual dark web's conversation. I'm just surprised that Yuval Harari hasn't, really made a prominent kind of appearance in the activities of the intellectual dark web. So I mean, like the organizations of or the organized kind of speeches and
Well, I think
shows like
a lot of the
Pangburn philosophy and that kind of stuff. He hasn't really made an appearance that strongly, and it's like, well, guys, I think the debate that Jordan Peterson and Sam Harris have been having are extremely relevant to what Yuval has been talking about. It's like, guys, you're trying to debate whether we should preserve the importance of what religion has done for us so far, or whether we should abandon, in large part, what religion has done or what we do within religion in order to be more secular. And so, that directly ties into what you've always saying. It's like, well, ultimately speaking, we have no choice to forget the religions, and in fact, we have been forgetting religion. In the 20th century, we haven't been
well, most
religious.
Christians aren't
We've
really
been,
Christian. It's like, for example,
yeah, exactly. We haven't been religious in the traditional sense of the word. I mean, religiosity is something you can't get rid of, but we've switched religions. We've no longer, believed in God. We've believed in human beings as being God. Now that human beings are being replaced by algorithms and technology, well, then human beings no longer hold the authority to make decisions into the future. So what do? Do we revert back to God, or do we give power to this next God, or do we try to stay in the middle and preserve liberal values and preserve human beings as the highest form of authority? It's a very tough decision.
first of all, I'd say the IDW, intellectual dark, they're not really concerned with transhumanist thought or where.
But they should be.
Yeah, I know, I agree,
They're
because
talking about
they're
the right now. It's like talk about the future a little bit
yeah
here,
they're talking about politics and social issues right now. But that's the thing. There's a big line drawn between the people who have the most power, who are the ones investing all this money into transhumanism, and then the rest of the population who's just trying to live their lives and deal with their political atmosphere, right? That's a big issue because most people are not aware of. Well, I think most people realize now that more than half of the wealth in the world is owned by less than 60 people, and these people are highly invested in learning as much as possible about how populations work, through algorithms, through Google and all this, observations, social engineering, advertising, those kinds of those kinds of things, and securing their place, getting better technology, and maybe even beating death or those kinds of things, the transhumanist ideals. It's like, who do you think is funding this stuff? Like, the average person isn't investing into transhumanist concepts.
Mm.
It's a very small group, but a very, very powerful group. And they're playing this game outside of the realm of the bread and circus politics, the fighting that's going on between left and right, that's keeping us all distracted from where we're actually headed.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's kind of like, the people who own the data are going to be the real gods, ultimately
Yep.
speaking. And those people will not want to be part of what they're creating. I don't think that, for example, the head of Google would want to, be run. I don't think they will be run. I think that the heads of all these companies that will own big data, I don't think they'll submit themselves to that data. You know what I mean? Because ultimately speaking, they want to retain their, autonomous sort of ways of thinking and egos and desires so that they can influence and control. I mean, and that's not some kind of conspiracy. I think that's just normal. I mean, obviously,
Well,
I think everybody does that to some
talking about
degree.
forever.
Yeah, but so I think, this is why transhumanism seems to be the answer, because those specific people don't want human beings to transition into the best thing that a human being can become with these technologies, whether they live symbiotically with the technologies or if they just, because I can see transhumanism going in several ways. We may not, advocate, we may just stop at, say, for example, injecting nanotechnology in the bloodstream, and that's the only sort of synthetic part of us. Obviously people who have, bionic arms and that kind of shit, and they want to replace their limbs, whatever. I think there might be a few of those, but ultimately speaking, the human beings who stay human, who stay biological, but who have, say, for example, genetic engineering and that kind of stuff, that to me is a transitioning of human beings. But transhumanism, in the sense that you're transitioning into something else, well, it's not really transhumanism. It's syntheticism, or whatever you want to call it. It's trans whatever you would become, trans silicon based life form or whatever.
Do you really think that the average person is going to be able to afford these kinds of processes? And I get the idea that it's going to get cheaper over time, but like, how long, first of all, and how, like, we already are overrun with medical issues. It's hard enough to treat everyone as it is. When you start introducing these, like, this kind of biotech where people can upgrade themselves, so-called, well, okay, then you need extra businesses aside from the average medical practice that's already overrun and overwhelmed. And who gets chosen out of the millions of people who want to have this process done? Well, it's going to be the people who pay.
Yeah, at first, and they're going to get the upper hand, and then it'll trickle down.
Where do all these resources come from, man?
I don't think so, because these technologies don't take resources. That's the point. They're so efficient.
No,
well, think about
that's not true, man.
Think about
We're
stem
not working
cells.
on efficiency right now.
No, but think about stem cells. You know what I mean? Think about nanotechnology. Well, how much? So let's take a really rudimentary example. If I want to build a computer in 1970, right? I'm going to need an entire building, right? Just for the processor to calculate.
Yeah, I get that over time.
A very small amount of data. Yeah. Well, obviously, the resources aspect of it is no longer an issue, and that's why we're posed with this threat and this problem of the future. Is that we've made everything so efficient and so small, which in technological terms means powerful.
But
the
building
smaller
nanobots, it's a very expensive process, even if they're small. It's not easy to build a nanobot.
Yeah. No, but then if you've built a machine that can build those nanobots with ease, do you know what I mean? That's the problem, is that the things are so getting more and more efficient. 3D printing, all these kinds of things. So ultimately speaking, And don't forget, the free market capitalism regulates price. You know what I mean, based on supply and demand of, and supply and demand is something that is, I guess, almost stable by virtue of people, owning a certain amount and having to do something to own more. It's like self-regulating, and so I
I
don't
don't
know
know,
if
man,
I'm being very
because
clear there.
no, I get that, but the
But
thing is that why is our medical system so overwhelmed now? Then, and it's not gotten better in that sense. It hasn't
no,
gotten more
yeah,
efficient
no, no,
because people are paying for the transhumanist stuff. That's not the money is going there mostly, and into more military
no.
type things. And
Well, like I said, the technology has been causing medical issues, and the answer
that too.
seems to be more technology. That's what people say. They say, okay, well, if we're not
Now
as
you
healthy
just
because we're
sound like
sitting
the
in front of.
left. That's like when they realize that things haven't been working out, they're like, okay, we need to do more of it, and they
Yeah,
keep
but that's
pushing forwards.
look. I'm not saying that I'm advocating for these things. I'm saying that this is the way things are going. This is the way the decisions that are being made.
And why is that?
Instead of
It's not because it's some like path that nature has made in history that like we're just compelled this way. No, it's because there are a few people who have a lot of money who want this, and they're directing
yeah,
based off of their philosophy and what they think is best for the world.
yeah,
That's it.
it could very well be that. Yeah, yeah. But it seems very difficult to slow down. And
Yeah, agreed.
but I think whether so we're talking about a lot of different things here. We're talking about technology. We're talking about how it, economically speaking, it has impacts. How it affects the health and that kind of stuff. But all these problems, they are discussions that need to be taken up by people like Sam Harris and Jordan Peterson. I don't need them to. I don't think
Yeah,
they
I
need
agree.
to be able to be savvy and talk about technology all that much. I think they need to understand that, because they ultimately have a greater perspective on as to what a human being is. Therefore, I think they have more capacity to understand what a human being has like options as to what it should become, what it should want to become, what it should not want to become going into the future, not as it is right now. And so this is a discussion I feel like they should be having. I don't think it would take very long for Sam Harris and Jordan Peterson to get up to date as to where the technology is today and how it's impacting society and how it will in the future. Having a few discussions on stage with guys like Ben Goertzel and even Zoltan. I think Zoltan Itzhak or it's something. Anyway, he's the problem with the transhumanist movement, I think, today is that they seem to have a very kind of immature. I'm not calling them immature, but the desire to prolong your own life just so that you can live. If you want to live long enough to make it to the technology in the future that will allow you to live forever, that seems to me a very, very narrow, single-minded, egotistic, kind of immature
Kill me now.
desire.
Like,
but do you know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
I think they ultimately do want that for the betterment of humanity, but it's clear that a lot of these people have that intention, and it's like you can wrap it up in all of this kind of inclusivity and all these other sort of like we want to save humanity, but ultimately speaking, if the intention of these people, but I just want to decide, is it a selfish thing and just immature, or is it actually a transparent and maybe even an honorable thing? Maybe I shouldn't look at it straightforward and say, yeah, these guys just want to live forever. Like, okay, but that has nothing to do with the problems of humanity and are we human and what's going to happen in the future and morality. They deal with those things as a consequence of their desire to live forever, which, maybe their desire to live forever and them being transparent about it is actually an honorable thing. But in the aftermath of that desire, they end up solving a lot of major problems. I don't know.
Well, a big question here is Well, have these people actually thought of why we die? Or what happens if everyone doesn't die, or a large portion of the population doesn't die? We're playing God here a lot, and I'm not saying that that's inherently bad, but it's, man, we're getting really fucking arrogant. It's like maybe there's a system, maybe there's a reason why we die, maybe there's a flow, a cycle, or at least the system, like Earth, the Earth system, the way everything's worked for forever, works in a certain way that includes death and is required to include death. And so if we tamper with that, do we have a whole natural sustainable system that can replace that? That's a big question.
That's interesting.
Because I mean, we're already going in that direction. We're already scrapping everything that has to do with the cycles of nature. We're no one gives a shit about that. People are like, oh, we should live forever. We should all be able to live with our Wi-Fi and not be bothered by anyone and all this kind of shit. But we don't think about, like, okay, where are these resources coming from? Where is this all done? Do we all have enough space on Earth for everyone to do this kind of a thing? Is there even enough space on Earth for one person to do this kind of a thing? If you think about everything that's involved, meaning the progress to get to that point. And if it is completely unsustainable, do we have a new system to jump to? And I don't think we do. And I don't think that, I mean, I've looked at what people have considered, and I personally think all of those systems are going to fall apart and are utter bullshit, because I need a good metaphor for this. I'm going to work on this thought in itself. It's like we're trying to take all the, let's just say, life force. I'm not talking about there actually being a life force, but like all the resources, and trying to like use that to jump into a new world where we can build something that's completely different, where we can do whatever we want, right? But we have no idea, no fucking clue if that kind of a world is possible at all, and if we have enough life force energy or what resources or whatever to get there.
Not to mention that we don't even have a clue that what we want right now is something we'll even want when we do get there.
There you go.
And what we'll eventually want might not even be a want. It might not even be a desire. It might just be a very cold, sort of endless, mechanical kind of process. Entities that just go on doing whatever it is they're going to do without any kind of desire. Or I think we want to hold on to that romanticism of human beings and hold on to the magic. And it's like, well, if you create a world wherein you can do whatever you want, but by doing that you've undermined your ability to desire as a human being, then what the fuck is the point?
Yeah, and then at that point, if we still have the capacity to think ahead and try to project into where we want to go, the only actual path would be, okay, well, let's shut ourselves down, because as long as we have a motivation, we're stuck in this loop, and then it's useless. Well, I mean, that's the thing. If you get rid of your ability to experience pleasure, it's the same thing. If you try to get rid of your ability to experience pain, you get rid of your ability to experience pleasure. So you end up having no reason to live at all.
Yeah. And that's during your life. And then, if you still were to experience pain and pleasure alternately, but indefinitely speaking, then overall you're losing the purpose as to why you should feel pain and pleasure alternately speaking.
Well, that's a good question for people. Would you rather experience pain and pleasure forever, or just stop existing?
It's like, it seems to me that suffering and death are very necessary to happiness and purpose. Unless we find a way around that, which I don't know if that's something that,
it's like,
because, I think we would have found it as human beings, as far as what a human being is like in the last few thousand years. But maybe that's something that would be discovered with the technology. And I think people are placing a lot of faith in that. They're saying, well, maybe there is, if we do live forever and we do reduce all pain and suffering, that there, the intelligence that comes along with it will give us the perception and the ability to understand a greater purpose and a greater level of suffering and happiness that will be possible at that point.
Why
So
does
it's
it
like,
even matter at that
great.
point?
Well, the thing is, it's not that it matters. I think
no matter where
we
you are,
don't know.
you
That's the
scale
point.
back to the same thing.
Yeah.
If like a rich person who has a very easy life will make a big deal out of very small issues, and they'll experience it as being a lot of pain. I know a lot of people, and I mean, I've seen this too. I've traveled a lot. I've lived with people in
Yeah.
extremely difficult situations.
Like, oh
And
God, my cleaning lady for my yacht is going away on vacation. What am I going to do?
yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
yeah,
Yeah,
that
and
kind of shit.
I've met all kinds of people whose entire families have died, and there's a great documentary about this. I think it's called Happy or Happiness, and it shows that the happiest people are these people with very difficult lives who are very poor and have no technology.
But here's the interesting thing, though. When you say that they have difficult lives, but in comparison to you,
Yeah,
they might not see their lives as difficult.
exactly.
Whereas
There you
those
go.
who have easy lives may not have easy lives because,
Yep. No, I agree.
it's a point of perspective thing. Like,
Yep.
if you're rich doesn't necessarily mean happiness doesn't correlate with these things. So yeah, you're right. We should definitely point that out. It's like living forever, experiencing no suffering and just happiness and pleasure. These things won't ultimately bring you happiness because they don't bring you purpose. The purpose seems to be relativity. I mean, you see this in physics: E equals mc squared. Special relativity. All these things that Einstein brought up. In the philosophical world, it's the same thing. We always bring people back to the concept of relativity. You bring purpose to my life because you are separate from me. You have you are an opposite to me. There's a relativity between us that happens, and through that relativity, purpose is installed, happiness is installed. You know what I mean?
Well, I like to say you're always going to have problems, so might
Yeah.
as well just enjoy it and also celebrate that fact, because these problems, if you approach them in the sense of with a lot of enthusiasm, well, I mean, that's why I talk about these kinds of things. I don't do it because I'm trying to change the world or something. I do it because these are problems that we're facing, and this is fun for me. I'm trying to figure things out, and it's not easy.
Yeah.
There's a painful process in there, but I've accepted that. And that's what my entire life is. That's what all life is. And if we get rid of all our problems and we're all this giant space blob that is one mind meshed together, trying to fire off pleasure center dopamine rushes all the time, flying through space, blowing up planets, we're going to get really fucking bored.
Yeah, that will ultimately we'll have solidified the absurdity that we seem to be fighting. It's existence, my existence is absurd, but at least I can construct a purpose, and that's in the words of Jim Holtz, that's a pretty good one.
Games are absurd, but they're fun, so that's a purpose in itself.
Yeah, exactly.
That's what life is.
We've sort of thrown away the games of being a human to be playing games of being anything but. When you go to a nerd's house, you see them playing games like what's it called, World of Warcraft, that kind of shit.
Yeah.
You're not being human anymore in those games. You're being something else. And then when you get tired of that, you want to be something else, and it goes on forever. So you have to learn to be happy with what you are first, and that seems to be the issue. What is human beings? And we need
stop trying to
redefine that.
Just be.
No. Yeah, but I think we need to redefine it at some major points in reality. Like, obviously, we defined ourselves once we became Homo sapiens and we left the apes behind. And now we're turning into something else.
I don't think we defined ourselves consciously. I think we just were. We were doing what we were doing.
No, but we define ourselves all the time. When you write a piece of music, you're defining who you are as the Homo sapien Oliver Gold.
In that sense.
Yeah, that's what I mean. I don't mean like you have to philosophically kind of say, oh, okay, a human being is someone who has two eyes, a nose, a mouth, takes a shit, jacks off, eats food, and does it all over again. No, I mean, we need to understand and redefine what it means to be human through the various actions that we take. And because ultimately speaking, that's what makes you human is how you behave and how you feel and how you experience. And so this is something that needs to be redefined in the near future. We need to do it now because if we wait till we change too radically, then we haven't really defined who we are by choice. We have become, because you know what I mean? Like, we didn't define ourselves to become human beings. When we were apes, we didn't choose to become Homo sapiens. That's something we didn't have control over. But this is the first time a sentient being of life, has the actual power to define itself going forward into the future.
Well, who you need to be saying this to are the tech billionaire guys.
Well, here's the thing: they understand that. They understand that very clearly, but they're saying, yeah, well, I get to make that decision. I get to say what
exactly.
You know what I mean? And it's like, fuck you. I think we should, all have that power within ourselves.
And that's the issue. I think the main thing that we have to be aware of is what's going on right now. And I understand that we have to think in the future, but that's the whole issue is who are we letting steer the boat? And if everyone understood that we've been letting a small group of people decide, then we could do something. And then after that, we could try to figure out where we want to go, right? And I think that the big issue is that a lot of different people want different things. And that's difficult for people because it's like, well, what if what you want doesn't correlate with what I want? That's the whole issue, right? That is the issue. If we try to define humanity as a whole, is everyone going to accept that definition?
No, exactly. And I think that's why liberal values are something that we want to preserve, at least in terms of the authority of the individual. I should be able to define who I am as a human being. If I want to become my own type of human being, I think that's what we've been doing. It's kind of like humanity is a fragmented sort of entity that defines itself by its fragments. It's like, I'm a human being, you're a human being, and you define yourself, I define myself, and the fact that we're both human beings defining ourselves is what the meaning of humanity is, and that's what the liberal values sort of established. And we want to retain that. We want to keep that, because otherwise, it all goes to shit, right? And I think that's where we would sort of start going into circles. But how that relates back to the intellectual dark web, I think, we may be part of the web. Like I said, I think the web ultimately encompasses every human being on the planet. And if we are part of it, then I think this discussion should make its way closer to the center. And because I would like to see Matt Dillahunty, for example, and I would like to see Jordan Peterson and Sam Harris and Brett Weinstein, Eric Weinstein. These people specifically, I think, have something very important to bring to the table when it comes to these sort of topics. And I think they should be speaking to guys like Ben Goertzel, Jaron Lanier, name a person, the guys from Google, the guy, Zuckerberg from Facebook. All these people should be getting together and intermingling instead of having, their own. It used to be the psychologists had their own community, and the scientists had their own community, and they had their own discussions amongst themselves. The intellectual dark web said, hey, let's bring, some of us together and figure this shit out. But I think they should continue down that path and say, okay, well, let's mix in more people who have expertise and ideas and insights into the future that are very relevant to what we're talking about here, and include those things. You know what I mean? So.
Well, the question is, do the people at the top want that?
Yeah, but we're not talking about the top. We're talking about the center.
And what can the center do at this point? Most of us are pretty powerless, even in our own lives. That's a big question.
Yeah. Well, but here's the thing. In order to take power, you need to discuss. You need to talk. And I think.
Agreed.
as
Yep.
much as the intellectual dark web, I don't think is going to lose power in terms of what its idea was, and its idea was to spread the I guess to regain and solidify the the notion and the feeling of freedom to express ideas without any shame or without any sort of like person shutting you down for no good reason. Okay, I think that's what the intellectual dark web movement is actually going to it's going to be strengthened over time, because it's just the way it is. Nobody wants to. Communism didn't work and was very constrained. You know, you couldn't think, you couldn't speak, you couldn't do anything. People will always break out of that. So the intellectual dark web as a movement it's just in nature something that will be reinforced. Although the people at the center who are having the discussions, the specific discussions that got that movement started, right, which would be Harris, Peterson, and all these guys, the discussions they're having will lose steam.
Yeah.
And are, I think, already starting to lose steam because you can't talk about the Bible and its implications forever. You know, it'll fragment into these cults of people who follow these guys, you know, who gained some kind of, you know, I guess, publicity, right, from having come together to create the movement. But they won't stay in charge of the movement as like the founding fathers, and they'll continue sort of like guiding the movement. No, it doesn't work that way. The movement takes on its own form, its own life. It takes on many people. It takes on everybody at some point. You know what I mean? And so I think people like you and I who want to make sure that that movement does incorporate certain topics have to speak up.
Yeah.
So that
I
it,
agree.
you know, that you know, sure, the specific topics that have been spoken about will lose
Grassroots
steam in some
revolution.
capacity, but yeah, but at least other things will gain steam and energy and focus, things that are relevant and need to be relevant.
Mm, well, a big question is maybe these people are thinking about this stuff, but they're scared to bring it up because if they butt heads with people at the top, then they're going to attract bad attention. Maybe they've been contacted before, and I know this sounds conspiratorial, but I mean, come on, really? Do you really think that people who are talking to enormous groups of people haven't been approached by larger interests at this
Yeah,
point?
yeah,
The question is, where does everyone stand? Like, it's funny to watch Elon Musk these days. He's all over the place. He's I think he's kind of getting confused about where he stands and where the power structure is, and how he's been either used but also trying to get away from being used. But I mean, the same thing might apply to the IDW. Maybe they're even being used to distract people from the really important questions, meaning where we're going.
yeah, yeah. It's an interesting point of view. I think Elon Musk has been very intelligent in that regard because he doesn't create technologies. I think that can. The one thing that he's dipped his finger into would be the neural lace thing, right?
Yeah.
He wants to have some kind of control over and oversight over the technology so that people don't run into it. So that's a good thing. But aside from that, everything else that he's touched really doesn't have a negative impact. Like think about Einstein creating the, you know, figuring out how to split the atom with numerous other people like Heisenberg and so on. You know, like his discovery and his hand in that matter had negative impact, and indeed very well did have negative impacts. You know what I mean? And they manifest themselves. So, you know, but Elon Musk isn't saying, okay, I'm creating a new technology, and that with that technology, you know, people are going to be able to do some evil shit, so I should be careful here. No, he's taking the technologies that already exist and making them better, and that's a great way to start. And he's doing that in a way that is really unprecedented. You know what I mean? It's kind of like, oh, I'm not going to build a new kind of rocket that runs on, you know, yellow cake uranium. You know what I mean? Or anything like that. Or I don't know. That's a weird example, but he's saying, let's design a rocket that can be reused. Like that, to me, do you know what I mean? It's kind of like a lot of people just want to create something new and make their mark and say, well, I'm the new Tesla. But this guy's like, no, I'm going to make things that already exist better. And not enough people do that. Pick up the slack. You know?
I agree. I think he's not sure what's going on right now, and I think he's well intentioned. But anyways, it doesn't matter. I think it's a mix of things. I think he's been both confused, used, but also trying. He's not. He doesn't want to be used. He's trying to fight against that, and he's figuring out how people have been trying to direct him in a certain way. Anyways, I mean, if anyone wants to look into this, look at like the drug bust at Tesla, or I think it was at SpaceX or something like that. There's a lot of weird shit going on there. But all to say, what I'm ultimately saying is people on a large scale. I mean, historically, you see structures that are meant for something good that get infiltrated by larger forces and then turned. Like, do you really think that people who've been in power for a very long time don't know how to use revolutions to their own advantage? They've studied these kinds of things, and these kinds of ideas have been studied for hundreds of years. How do you manipulate the masses as soon as they start thinking for themselves? You can redirect it in many ways or infiltrate it the right way and then change the direction so that it kind of avoids the real issue and then just ends up distracting people from the real issues. This has been done again and again. It's bread and circus, opium for the masses, divide and conquer.
Yeah, it's almost like thinking for yourself, which is something like, like you said at the beginning, Peterson and Harris, are sort of subject to the pressures of, their supporters. And then so they get rigid in their ideologies. And that in itself could very well be, I guess, the tactics that people behind the scenes could use. It's kind of like, well, like if I were some evil genius, do you know what I mean? Behind the scenes kind of thing,
just
billionaire.
Say that they exist. Like, I'm not saying that they do, but
no.
For
But
this
here's
example,
the thing. Yeah. I think it's pretty clear that Putin did it with, the elections, by influencing. It takes if you have a couple $1 billion to just funnel into like troll farms and say, okay, well, if we do this, if we get the conservatives all riled up, they'll elect this kind of president, and that will somehow, not be to my benefit because that president has been elected, but to be to my benefit because it distracts the world from what I'm really doing. I don't give a fuck. Putin said it in an interview with Megyn Kelly, I think it was. He said very clearly, he says, the American politics, we don't need to influence them because we know the politics are going to go in a certain direction. They're going to go regardless of the politician getting office. And, so he says it doesn't matter if one person or another gets office. The direction the American politics is going in is very clear to us. So he says we don't need to influence them. And in fact, whether he doesn't need to influence American politics as to conservative or democratic, but he does need to inflate American politics as being the smokescreen. So I still think that what he's saying is very clever. Well, I think he did have a hand in American politics, but not because he cares who was going to win. He cares that was the main. He cares that that was the main smoke screen. You know what I mean? That can sort of, I guess, conceal whatever he's after. And whatever he's after, I shit you not, there's no way for anybody to know because this guy is ingenious. As evil as he is ingenious. There's no way to get, it's obvious.
Well, he has some amazing people working for him. Like, not amazing in a good way, but like fucking intelligent.
I've never looked at a guy and said it's clear that what he's doing is obvious, but he's so ingenious that
it doesn't matter.
That you can tell that what he's doing, he's so obvious about it because it doesn't matter that he's obvious because he's done something that's a lot more tricky, that's way more non-obvious. And that's what's dangerous. And I think, the only way around that is for discussion and people to talk and be aware of things. And this is why, like the intellectual dark web, WikiLeaks, things like that are important. To me, the real necessity is guys like Joe Rogan. Joe Rogan started a podcast and
by the
made
way,
podcasting.
I have to go very soon. Just saying.
Yeah, no problem. Yeah, we'll head out in a sec. But I think he made podcasting, very popular. And the reason that it's popular is, and the reason why he remains king of podcasters is because he keeps showing people that, you don't want to stay rigid in your ideology. And that's why he's so good to watch, because this guy, you don't know what he's going to think next. He's just really in it to expose whatever is interesting and whatever is relevant.
Kind of like a bulldog. You just
Yeah,
He's hunting the prize. He's hunting that fucking rabbit, and that's all he wants. And
but he wants to continue hunting. He doesn't want to
yeah,
catch the
yeah,
rabbit. He wants to continue hunting, and
he
that very
enjoys the run. He
action,
enjoys the chase.
exactly, that very
That's what I'm
notion
talking about too.
is it's crucial. It's crucial to humanity's well-being,
Hmm.
ultimately speaking.
Okay, just want to end with this. You said you were going to get into something saying if I was an evil genius. I want to know where you were
Yeah.
going with that. Complete that thought, and we'll wrap this up.
Well, if I was an evil genius, ultimately I would be doing what Putin does, which is
Okay.
what I just explained.
Yeah.
I would make it so that um, you're basically jumping, from one thing to another. You know what I mean? You're always looking for what is obvious, and you're attacking the issue that is obvious, and you're creating a dynamic in that issue. So you're saying, oh yeah, I mean, like, so for example, I think using what he did, he basically had a very obvious hand in American politics. He said, in his mind, I'm going to make it obvious that I have some kind of hand in this sort of election, right? And then, he knows that by doing that, the debate will be about him having influence over the elections, right? So that in itself takes away from the fact that he's been taking land where he's not supposed to, right? He's been establishing oil mines in the north where there's a lot of permafrost de-icing. You know what I mean? Permafrost is sort of melting up in the north. He's actually infringing on Canadian soil. He wants to take over a lot of the oil fields that seem to be discovered in the North Pole. And it's also a great place to establish, military bases, which he's doing in the North Pole because it has strategic advantage over the Americas, North America. So you could place missiles there, you could do a lot of things. All of this stuff goes out the window. Nobody cares about that stuff. It's no longer obvious. It's not even relevant when you've created something obvious to debate.
Yeah.
So you always go towards what's obvious. You create, what's obvious that may indeed, sort of kind of affect you negatively somewhere, but somewhere where it doesn't matter. Somewhere where people are distracted so that you can take power somewhere else where you really have an upper hand.
It's funny because in the U.S. right now, everyone's debating about what's going on in the U.S. and very few people are concerned with what's going on outside at all.
In Russia, yeah.
Or in China, or
in China, exactly.
And what do you think that does? It's just mind blowing. And of course, there are big issues in the States, but it's like at a certain point, people are going to take advantage of that. So how do you ultimately rally people up the best they can? Well, they have to get they're going to have to get a wake up call from the outside.
Yeah, and here's the beauty of it. I think this is where I'm making a bit of a prediction, but it might not be true. But I think it seems to me like nationalism is the obvious sort of straw man that he set up, because it's not about America or Russia. He doesn't give a fuck. Do you think that the people who have all the money and no, it's not about a nationalist thing. You know what I mean? And that's the age old thing that humans tend to keep falling in that pit. It's like, oh yeah, let's pit people against each other in terms of groups and identity politics and nationalism and this and that, men against women.
Most people in the U.S. and most people in Russia would get along great, right?
Exactly.
There's just a few people who are leading the march.
It's strange how that's the most obvious and easy thing to discover, but yet the people at the top and people who have money can still use that against everybody and just say, yeah, hey, let's create an issue here, let's create an issue there, let's do it. Who cares if they know that we're creating the issues? It doesn't matter, because at the end of the day, we have the upper hand enough to continue having the upper hand, and to continue tightening our grip.
And the more do that, the more power they have, and the harder it is for anyone else to do anything.
Exactly. They don't need to gain power. They have it. It's to solidify it. It's to make it irreversible. That's what they're doing, right? But
the problem is that system in itself is draining all the resources, and it's going to have to collapse sooner or later. That's how it always ends up happening. And if you think about it, it's not some evil geniuses at the top. Think about what most people would be thinking about if they have a If they have like homes, giant homes around every country on the world in the world. They own the banks in most of the world, let's just say, and so they basically own all the politicians. You know what? They're still worrying about, well, something still could go wrong.
Yeah.
That's funny
And here's
because
what
that's what we're all thinking. We're all trying to we're trying to patch the holes in what could go wrong in our lives. But even the people with
yeah.
all the resources, they're doing the same thing. And the way they're doing that is by making everyone else powerless so that no one can
Yeah.
oppose them. It's that
And
simple.
I want to introduce us just a bit of a perspective for people to understand what we're talking about here, and also to diffuse the sort of conspiracy kind of air that's sort of permeating. When we say the people at the top, it doesn't matter who it is. I'm talking about the evil genius in all of us, in humanity, that lurks. Because it could be Putin, or it could be Vasily, who comes from the rurals in Russia. It doesn't matter who it is. It could be, you know, Dexter. It could be my mother. It doesn't matter. It's the evil genius at the top
It's your
it's
mom.
ultimately speaking the person inside of every human being. It's this very innate way for humans to behave. I could very well be, and in fact probably would be, the evil genius. The evil genius within me would come out if I were in some kind of position that would allow me to take power. Power dynamics seems to run our very existence. It's something that, you know, I don't care to eradicate. I don't really give a fuck if people stay at the top or not. There will always be a top. I care that we don't destroy ourselves in the process.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Agreed.
So, anyway,
Well, I don't
it's a
think
good way to end things.
I mean, it's a part of our humanity, is that animalistic side that desperately wants to secure its place in the world. But I mean, I say, if you're listening to me right now and you're willing to listen to what I have to say, try to balance that out with other aspects of your humanity in your life, and that's how you're going to enjoy life to the utmost, even if it doesn't allow you as much success. A lot of successful people are miserable. It's being a balanced human being, and it doesn't mean to give up completely on success either. It's balancing life, and unfortunately, we have people who aren't balanced at all and are pushing as hard as they can and are sociopathic and very, very aggressive and intelligent. And then on the other side, you have very dumb people who just sit around trying to drugs and play guitar.
What we're talking about is, you know, balancing your own life, but I think it's important to make sure that there's the few people who can make it very difficult for people to balance their own lives to begin with. That's the balance we have to restore. It's like, okay, you know, I don't give a fuck about, you know, maybe having a yacht, but I want to be able to, you know, live my life without, you know, looking over my shoulder, and without having to go and kill someone for my food, you know, this kind of stuff. That could very well be something that would happen in the future because balance isn't restored. These people are taking, their weight is a little bit too heavy for, I think humanity would collapse under its own weight because of these people.
Yep.
So anyway, I'm going to leave it at that. Merry Christmas, by the way, dude.
Yeah, you too.
If we don't talk tomorrow. And let's, tomorrow's Christmas, yeah.
Is it? No, it's after tomorrow.
Yeah, man. Anyway.
All right, man. Merry Christmas, everybody.
Merry Christmas.
Ho, ho, ho. And a bottle of rum. Everyone get fucked up, because all going to crash soon, man. It's all going to be over.
It's over.
We're all going to be eating each other's faces, so you might as well enjoy your time while you got it. Merry Christmas.
All right, see you, dude.
Peace.